Hey, what's up everyone? Ben at ProFixer, and today on the workbench I have an iPhone XR. This particular one doesn't have any cracked glass, but it does have a cracked LCD. So I'm going to walk you through all the steps that I take to do an iPhone XR repair. As well, all the things on my workbench are linked up in the description below. So be sure to check those out, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Without further ado, let's get started on this iPhone XR. My favorite tool for any kind of screen repair is going to be my blue heat mat. And so I've had the phone sitting on it and actually noticeably warm, but I have it set to 60 degrees and it helps to make the adhesive a little bit easier to release. And on this particular model, we place it face down until it gets decently warm on the back. And at 60 degrees, it's a pretty safe temperature that you can leave the phone on there for extended periods of time without worrying about damaging any of the other components. Once it's actually noticeably warm, go ahead and remove the two pentalobe screws from the bottom, and let's dig in. To release the screen adhesive around the edges, I do use a flat razor. That's actually one of my other favorite tools because they are so thin, they're very strong, and they don't mark up the edges. If you use an iSesamo, if you've ever seen one of these are pretty nice. However, in order to slip this end in, they're a little bit too thick, and you can put a little pry mark on the device. If you try to slip the other end in, it's a little too thick and puts a little pry mark. However, being that these are razor sharp, you can slip them through between the bezel and between the housing without leaving a mark. And if you push directly down, it will work it into the bezel just like that, and you can tip it up and it lifts the screen out just a tiny bit. So it works very nicely to remove screens that aren't broken if you do battery replacements or charge port replacements or other types of things. The main thing with the razor blade is don't slide it down the edges, and also when you tip, don't dig the razor blade in, because if you slip farther in, you could hit the motherboard, flex cables, or the battery. So realistically, what you got to do is you got to press it directly down and then just tip along the axis of the housing itself where it sits. So we're going to do that on each side and release the screen. And basically what you want to do is you don't want to try to lift the screen at any point too high. You realistically just want to remove the adhesive that's going around the edges. And once the adhesive is released, the screen is so much easier to pull off. If you try to lift it up too much on one side and try to leverage it or try to muscle it out, you could damage the screen, which we don't want to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to lift this up and then tilt it back. So now that we have the phone open, I'm going to go ahead and take my heat mat and set it off to the side. And we are going to go ahead and start. If there's any kind of adhesive that's on the device, go ahead and start to pull that off. I always do that before I go any farther. And we're going to go ahead and start pulling off the bottommost cover that covers the battery. So go ahead and take those out. These are going to be tri-wing. Let's make sure you have a good tri-wing screwdriver. I really like this tool brand, which is a 2UUL, which is very nice. And they work very nicely. They have a really nice bit, so they bite really nicely into the actual screws without stripping them, and they're incredibly strong. You can pick those up at Injured Gadgets. I've got it linked up in the description, so be sure to check that out. The first thing we want to do on this one here is the LCD is damaged, and actually the touch panel is, so we don't really have any touch on the screen. So we're going to unplug this battery. And once the battery is unplugged, we're then safe to unplug all the rest of the components. So the battery's unplugged, and we can confirm that by pressing the power button, by holding it down, trying to power it up, and it's not going to power up, and we can actually see the battery is unplugged. So just working down, we're going to remove the cover that covers the LCD connectors. And we're going to remove that one there. And just like that, very easy to disconnect those connectors on the way up. And just removing all the rest of these as well. And weird thing about these XRs is they do have all tri-wings except at the top. They do have this little strange assortment of screws where they use two cross screws at the very top. And that one's actually kind of stuck in there. We're going to let that sit off to the side, and that'll work fine. I'm going to set that there, and now we're going to unplug the front ear speaker and proximity sensor and all that good stuff. And we're going to pull the rest of that off. For this here, we're actually going to set the screen onto our heat mat, make sure it's turned on, and basically to ensure efficiency in your workflow, leave your screen on the heat mat as you remove the adhesive, and that helps you to increase or to decrease your repair times, because now as we're cleaning, it's heating up, making it or preparing it for the next step. All right. It's actually got a little screw on the side of this one. This one actually does look like a replacement screen has been used. It's not our vendor stamp from one of ours. So maybe at another repair shop and it's come over here. But one of the screws did fall out from the edges of the edges from the screen, which on a new screen we're actually going to snug those down. You always want to snug down, especially on 10Rs. It seems the screws are always loose on those. But with anything that comes pre-assembled, I always snug up the screws if it has any in there, and that will that'll make sure that you don't have any screws falling out later on down the line. I'm going to take a little flat razor and try to clean this top up. You want to be very careful with these cameras up here. You don't want to slip and hit them because for all intents and purposes they are not necessarily replaceable depending on which ones you damage, and if you damage certain ones, it's very difficult to get Face ID working again. So definitely be very, very careful around those, especially around the sensor that sits off to the right side of your camera when you're facing it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and try to pull from behind this camera here, just using my tweezers very carefully to kind of roll that adhesive off. And there we go. That looks decently clean all around the edges. So make it pretty easy to clean it. I do use a little bit of alcohol to clean up any kind of oils or just any kind of broken down adhesive. It kind of purifies the surface a bit. The better you clean this, the better your new seal is going to sit. And not that we add the seal to really waterproof it or make it any kind of water resistant, but it's to keep it as close to the OEM specs as we can, and it does help to hold the screen in. So it makes it feel a little more OEM. The screen doesn't seem to pop or anything like that because it's held down in the frame with adhesive, and so that's what we do, and that's why we use the adhesive perimeter. So we're going to set those off to the side, and I'm going to go ahead and transfer the new parts to the new screen, and I'll show you how to do that. So go ahead and open up your box if you haven't already, and go ahead and get your 10R screen out. And what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and peel off these little blue covers here. So I got those peeled off, and everything else looks like it's sitting correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and snug up the edges here. And once again, the whole time our old screen has been sitting on the heat mat, and we want to make sure that it's sitting on there to ensure that it is warm enough for us to work with. And these screws here, just like they always seem to be on 10Rs, not necessarily other models, but the 10Rs, they do seem to be a little bit loose. Just go around the edges and snug those up. Perfect. I'm going to set that off to the side. We're going to bring our heat mat right here in front of us, make it easy to work with. And using a Phillips screwdriver, we're going to go ahead and pull these screws out. There is 3 Phillips, and then there is one that is a tri-wing. And there's one at the very top next to the cameras. It's a tiny, tiny tri-wing. All right, so what we do here is we do want to flip the speaker assembly backwards. So be very careful whenever you lift this up in the front. Actually, everything's just falling right out. Made it super easy for us. Generally, it is a bit harder, and I do use a little bit of alcohol to release it from any of the adhesive foams, because these particular sensors are adhered in just a tiny bit on an OEM screen. But seeing this one has been replaced by another repair shop, They don't even have the heat dissipation sticker on the back. It's kind of a cheaper job, so it definitely came out a little bit easier for us. So that works out. So now we want to go ahead and put this into the new screen here. Making sure to line up the sensors and making sure they sit flush inside of that front bracket there. Let's go ahead and put our Phillips screws back in. All right, here we go. And putting in the last little tiny tri-wing. All right. So everything is now installed on here, so now we're going to go ahead and install it in the frame. In order to install this in the screen, we do need to install some of the screen adhesive. On this particular 10R, it does not have any of the perimeter adhesive that shipped with the screen, which it normally does. But in this situation, if you're found in the same situation as myself, what you'll want to do is still apply a little bit of adhesive. I do use some Tessa tape from time to time if we run into a situation like this one here. But this incredibly thin, I think it's a 1 millimeter or 2 millimeter Tessa tape, works just fine for lining the screen. Like I mentioned before, the adhesive doesn't necessarily prevent any kind of water from entering the phone, doesn't increase any kind of water resistance, but what it does, it holds the screen into the housing tight so that it doesn't have a click, so it doesn't have any kind of loose feeling. So that's what we're going to do here, and it accomplishes the same result. Just doesn't look as fancy as the actual pre-made adhesive, but it'll work just fine for what we're using it for. So what you want to do is go ahead and put 2 strips along the edge. And 1 millimeter adhesive works nicely for this because you can just line it up down the edge. And Tessa tape is thin enough that it's not going to cause any kind of thickness issues or anything like that. And there we go, we got that one side on. Now let's go ahead and line this other side. And I always do prefer to use the pre-cut adhesive, but it's not a deal breaker if we don't have it available. Seeing that it's not going to increase any kind of water resistance, this will work just fine. What you can do is go ahead and take a tool like this Sesamo, or the back end of your tweezers would work fine as well, and you can run it along the edge to push down the adhesive a little bit. And that'll ensure that the adhesive is pressed firmly into the housing, so that you don't have any lifts or anything like that. Being that this is Tessa tape, it's incredibly strong. You can get away with just putting a line down each side, and that will accomplish what we're looking for here, and that is to hold the screen in securely so it doesn't have any lift or any kind of bump whenever you're using it. So what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and test fit this screen here and make sure everything is functioning as it should. Going to plug in that front sensor assembly, and then want to plug in our LCD and digitizer, and go ahead and plug in your battery. What we'll do here is we're going to hold down the power button for approximately 3 to 5 seconds until it powers on. With these newer devices, they do take a little bit longer to turn on than some of the older ones. And like I mentioned in one of my previous videos, it is kind of a little bit daunting and a little bit, it kind of gives you a little bit of fear if you try to power on the device, holding it down just 2 to 3 seconds, it doesn't power on. If that ever happens, hold it down a little bit longer and it's probably going to power on. However, even after holding it down for a few seconds and you don't see anything, what I would do at that point is unplug the battery, disconnect everything, and plug it all back in, and kind of follow your process that way. So cool. It looks like this one is powering up, and as far as the animated background there, looks like that is working. So what we're going to do is, since that appears to work, we're going to go ahead and put our screws in and get this one all buttoned up. So I'm going to go ahead and put this center one in here. The reason for that is this holds down the LCD and the digitizer. If that comes unplugged while you are working on it, it can cause issues to the motherboard, possibly blowing the backlight or something more substantial. Those situations are pretty expensive, and you want to avoid those if at all possible. So I always put this one in first so that those are secured firmly, just in case we'd maybe bump the phone and the screen would fall. That way these don't come out. So once we have that on, let's go ahead and connect our battery, or put our battery cover on. And here we go. We're going to put one screw. And as I put these in here, I'm not tightening them up all the way. I'm just tightening them up just about one turn. And then once I have all my screws in, then I tighten them up the rest of the way. And what you can find is there's a little bit of play as far as in the brackets themselves. So if you tighten down one screw, your bracket could be turned a little bit, and it'll make it very difficult to insert your other screws. So I always do that. I always make sure that we just tighten up the screws about one turn and then tighten them up the rest of the way once we have all the rest of the screws in from that particular bracket. Here we go. I'm going to add this top one in here. And this is a little bit of a strange one. It has like this little weird bracket on it. That should work fine. And these are all tri-wing except those two that are in the top right corner of the phone. I'm going to connect these up here. We'll adjust this little bracket over here to reconnect as it should. There we go. That little bracket is a little bit strange. It has this little grabber on the bottom side, so you may be able to rotate it and connect it back over to your little bracket cover, and that will help. And this top one is a cross screw. It's not tri-wing, so you will need to use a tri-wing screwdriver on it. And here we go. Now we're going to go ahead and remove our little backing from our Tessa tape. And on these, what I do, I always insert the top of the phone a little bit first, using two fingers at the top to apply even pressure and kind of work the phone in until you see that it's completely flush up in the top, just like that. And as long as it is, then I turn the phone onto the side here and I make sure that my LCD flex cables aren't sticking out too far. If they are, what you can do is take the back side of your tweezers and kind of bump them, because they sometimes get stuck to the adhesive that's along the edge. And then what we're going to do is connect the bottom, and as soon as we have the bottom in, you can run your thumb up the side and then do the same on the other side there. So that will ensure that it's all seated in the frame properly. And then what you want to do before you put your bottom screws in, take a look around the edges and make sure that the screen is sitting absolutely flush. That is absolute key before you go ahead and give this one back to the customer, because if it is lifting up, you may possibly have a little bit of adhesive, or maybe pinching a cable, or maybe have a stray screw that you missed and it was stuck to adhesive and now the screen is sitting on it. It'll prevent a lot of issues if you just do a very quick and brief visual inspection afterwards. And ours definitely checked out. It's sitting very flush. And as well, one thing you want to do is pull down the screen protector portion and take a peek at your front camera. Make sure everything is aligned there, because if it's not, you will want to lift your screen up and to adjust things or clean it if you do have any issues there. And these bottom screws seem to have lost their magnetism, so we'll go ahead and insert that there. If that ever happens to you where you have a screwdriver that seems to lose its magnetism, you can remagnetize it. I do have a couple videos here on the channel, so go look back at those, and we'll probably link that up in the description below as well. But it's how to use a magnetizing block, which is very easy to use. Basically, magnetizing block has a hole in it, and you just insert your screwdriver into that hole, and it remagnetizes your screwdriver. So very, very cool process. Very easy to do as well. Alright, perfect. Got those two screws in the bottom, and everything seems like it's all back up and working again. We're going to do a full test on this one. We actually do a two-tech check, which is a check between two different techs here in our store to ensure that, that the phone has been restored fully functional again. If you like this video, go to hit the like button and subscribe. And as well, like I mentioned earlier, everything on my workbench is linked up in the description below. Feel free to follow us on social media, but I appreciate y'all watching, and I'll catch you on the next video. See y'all later.